Hi, and welcome to my presentation on positive behavioral strategies for the classroom. So, as a behaviorist, I see a problem with classroom teachers being overwhelmed by pressures from above, kids picking up on that tension, possibly acting out and kind of creating a downward spiral towards a negative learning environment. What I would like to do is give teachers very simple tools to create an upward spiral towards creating a more positive learning environment, increasing student productivity, and hopefully making the teacher's job a little bit easier. There is a behavioral principle known as non-contingent reinforcement, which purports that giving reinforcement such as praise or any kind of positive verbal interaction at regular intervals, regardless of what's happening in that moment, decreases negative behaviors and can help increase productivity. So my investigative question is testing that theory in a second grade inclusion classroom. There was an experiment done in 2007 by Alday and Pakarar that I found out about through readings for a different course, and basically they did this intervention where a teacher greeted their middle school students at the door and said one positive thing about them each individually. That was the entire intervention. Nothing else changed. And classroom productivity overall increased from 45% to 72% student on-task behavior. That's just by greeting the students at the door. That blew my mind, and I wanted to learn more about that amazing potential. And I found many other similar studies evidencing that more frequent praise in the classroom leads to more effective education. This is what a low-cost, high-yield, positive behavioral intervention strategy looks like for the classroom. I don't work in a school, so the classroom that I chose to do this experiment in was my son's second grade inclusion classroom in the South Shore of Massachusetts. The rankings at this school are generally very average. The interesting thing about this particular classroom is that there are 5 students with IEPs, 26 students total, and the teacher has very little classroom assistance. There is one part-time paraprofessional that works between this classroom and the other inclusion second grade classroom. There is also a special education coordinator for the entire school that each classroom has very limited access to. So in some ways, this makes this the ideal classroom to try this experiment out in because the teacher doesn't have a lot of other resources. So I came up with 3 questions within the question that I wanted to measure. First one is what variables influence teacher buy-in of behavioral interventions in general, particularly the non-contingent reinforcement. The next question is, does non-contingent reinforcement affect student attitudes towards school? And finally, does non-contingent reinforcement improve student productivity? For the first 2 questions, I am using mostly qualitative data measures such as observations, focus groups, and questionnaires. For the children's attitudes, I am going to use a Likert scale because it's very simple and easy to understand, and you don't need a big vocabulary to answer the questions. To measure actual productivity and on-task behavior, I'm using quantitative measures, such as looking at permanent records of test scores and completed homework assignments, comparing those from before and after the intervention, as well as doing interval recording of on-task behaviors in the classroom before and after the intervention. Using the triangulation matrix is one way of ensuring valid data because you're getting it from multiple sources. One important method often used in behavioral analysis experiments to ensure reliability of the data is something called inter-observer agreement. That is where two or more observers record the same incidences of behavior at the same time and then compare the results to make sure that everyone is in agreement of what's happening. I also plan on ensuring that my data is valid and reliable by journaling, checking my own biases, and during interviews, making sure that I am giving the interviewees a chance to honestly and openly answer the question. Finally, I understand that oftentimes in action research, we are not too concerned about the generalizability of the experiment. However, in this case, because I'm experimenting on an evidence-based principle, such as non-contingent reinforcement, I believe that this experiment is very generalizable, and it would be a great way to determine if this experiment is externally valid by doing it in other classrooms. I would begin by coding the results from the interviews with the teachers and kind of separate the comments into positive and negative. I would then compare them with the same interview after the intervention to see if there are more positive statements or more negative statements after the intervention. The ABC chart refers to an antecedent behavior consequence data that I would take directly after the verbal praise was given to see if it had an immediate effect on production in the classroom. I would score scales like the Likert scale that I would give to the students, and as well as scoring interval observation data, which just means, let's say every 10 minutes we look around the classroom, we see who's on task, who's not, and we write the percentage of students on task, the percentage of students off task. And then we collect that data, say every 10 minutes, and we see were there more students in general on task after the intervention or before the intervention. Finally, counting permanent products just means counting the completed work turned in and test scores to compare, again, are they better or worse since the intervention began. These are some of the projected outcomes I expect to find from this intervention. The green bars are before the intervention of verbal praise regularly at regular intervals, and the orange is during the intervention. As you can see, completed student work would go up slightly, test scores would go up slightly, engaged participation would go up a little more significantly, and that engaged participation, I believe, is what will make the completed work and the test scores go up. And when you have students who are doing better in participation, test scores, and completed work, you're going to find a teacher with higher job satisfaction. I received some very helpful feedback from my peers. All of them said that the sound didn't work, and I know why, and I think I fixed it. Hope you can hear me. Also, some suggestions were made about my literature review. First of all, to expand on it, it was quite small initially, and the slide was confusing and unclear. And also just to make sure that the literature focuses on the research question, which it did cause me to go back and make sure that everything was matching. Positive feedback I received were that the slides focused on core factors and were simple and easy to look at. Turns out I was not the only one who was having trouble adding audio to my presentation. I think that was a kind of a common problem back at week 5, but hopefully we fixed that. Very interesting topics. I really enjoyed reading what my classmates were working on. I just suggested a few slides are really much easier to digest if there's less words and sometimes fewer graphics as well. And that the contextual plan can be reduced to a few key factors, especially on a slide. Okay. My most profound takeaways from this assignment and from the course in general weren't specific to my research project, but to research in general. That our ideas matter, that hope is a valuable resource. That was in the text reading for last week. That really stuck with me. And that improving education takes every kind of intelligence. And our research is important. I just wanted to thank you very much for reviewing my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.